reached the end of the line, quite literally. So we're going to pull the locomotive onto this turntable and spin it around 180 degrees for the return trip to Grand Junction. This turntable you're looking at here was constructed in 1916 by the American Bridge and Iron Company and was used by the Central of Georgia Railroad in Macon, Georgia at their locomotive back shops. That is up until 1925 when they sold it to a branch line based out of Cedartown, Georgia. And Cedartown, it was used in a very similar fashion to how we're using it here today. We acquired this table in the 80s, moved it to this location, and we've been using it here ever since. This table is 80 feet long, and it weighs in at 80 tons. Keep in mind, the average school bus only weighs about 12 tons. But that locomotive right there, it weighs in at 125 tons. So when it's on the table here, the overall weight between the two will be sitting just over 200 tons. So it may surprise you to know that this table was originally turned by hand. It was an Armstrong table. There would have been poles extending off each end, and it would have taken 4 people to push those poles to spin the table around. Do we have any volunteers? We're going to need 4. We got a hand here, here, here. That's 3. Need 1 more. Yeah, I'm just kidding. We don't do it that way anymore. Now instead, we're just using a small 25 horsepower motor under the operator's shed here that our conductor Dave will be operating, the man in the box. Now the way they're able to turn it by hand, and the way we're still able to turn it by motor still today, is by making sure the table is balanced. As the locomotive gets centered on the table here, if you keep an eye on the far end of the table, down here where I'll be at, you'll see it drop by just a few inches. When it drops, we know the table is balanced. So basically, when it drops, he stops. The locomotive pulling our train today is the Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia Railroad number 80, built in 1968 by General Motors Electromotive Division, or EMD, or of course, the Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia Railroad, also known as the TAG, the local railroad based here out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, that ran through Gadsden, Alabama. This is a GP38, a model GP38, the GP meaning general purpose. This locomotive was designed for any service, freight, passenger, and switching service, for example, and it produces 2,000 horsepower. It is named the John A. Chambliss because it was named in honor of the vice president of the TAG when it was purchased, and number 80 because it was dedicated on his 80th birthday. This was the last, largest, and most powerful locomotive that the TAG would purchase before it became a part of the Southern Railway, and then of course later Norfolk Southern. So this locomotive would see service for both of those railroads before being retired. It was purchased at auction in 2001 by the Chambliss family. They would then donate the locomotive to us. We would restore it back to operation, and we've been using it ever since. One of the bigger things we did with it, of course, was restoring it to its original paint scheme, the paint scheme it wore when it was new. If you have a look up at the cab there, you're going to see one of our engineers and our road foreman. That is Zach and Jim. Give them both a wave here. You'll see our engineer once we get the locomotive turned around. He's on the other side. Now, while these are commonly referred to as a diesel locomotive, the correct term for these engines is actually diesel electric. Meaning inside this engine, there's a large diesel motor running a generator. That generator produces electricity, and that electricity is fed down to the traction motors that sit on each axle of the locomotive. And it's those traction motors that are actually propelling the engine. Hence the term diesel electric. You can think of it as a hybrid of sorts. Diesel locomotives have always been made that way, and that is the way they are still made today. Whether it's Norfolk Southern, CSX, or Union Pacific, they're all diesel electric. The major difference between the locomotives built in 1968 and the ones being made today is that today's modern engines have computer systems in them, as well as produce much more power and are much more fuel efficient. The reason why these locomotives here were going to replace the steam locomotive was for money. The steam locomotives are much more expensive all around to operate. There is a misconception, though, that power was the reason. That is actually not the case. Most steam locomotives of the day were much more powerful than their diesel locomotive counterparts. As an example, as I mentioned a few moments ago, this locomotive in front of us, built in 1968, only produces 2,000 horsepower. But one of our operating steam locomotives, the Southern Railway 4501, built in 1911, it produces 53,900 pounds of tractive effort, the equivalent of about 2,500 horsepower. It was not until the mid-70s that these locomotives would finally be able to reach the 2,500 horsepower rating, about 65 years later. Now, if you look up on the cab there, you'll see our engineer, Jody. He's responsible for operating this locomotive and getting us here and back safely today. So everyone go ahead and give him a wave. Now, some of you have probably seen our equipment before and not even realizing it. We working with both Johnny Cash and George Turner on these video films involving our equipment and films such as Like North Style with Jake Gyllenhaal and Laura Dern, Leatherhead with George Clooney, Blood for Elephant with Robert Pattinson and Reese Witherspoon, and most recently 42 with Chadwick Boseman and Harrison Ford. The last three of those movies I mentioned also being short property here. And of course, we're also frequently involved in documentaries and children's shows filming episodes as well. As you probably noticed here, our train still sits on track 1 while we've run the locomotive up for track 2. That is so we can do a runaround. What that means is the locomotive is going to go past our train and then through a switch. It will then reverse through the switch, back into track 1, pick up to the opposite end of the train. So what was the front is down the back and vice versa. Now that we have completed turning the locomotive around, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to come up and ask me. I'll be standing right behind this last car on the train. Come see me there. I'll be happy to answer any question you may have. I do my best to answer them, but of course if I don't have an answer for you, I will make something up that sounds good. Also, feel free to follow that locomotive to the other end of our train. Just beyond the depot if you would like to watch it recouple to the train for the return trip.